Lesson 3.2, Parallel Lines and Transversals. The essential question, when two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, what are the resulting pairs of angles that are congruent? In our exploration, we took a look at what happens when two lines end up being parallel. Let's go ahead and let me draw from the previous lesson. The previous lesson we had two lines that were not necessarily parallel, and then we had a transversal. And we have things like corresponding angles like 1 and 5. So you can see visually that 1 is obtuse and 5 is acute. In our exploration, when the two lines ended up being parallel to each other, we found that if the two lines are parallel, we found that angle 1 was congruent to angle 5. They both have the same measure. Now, alternate exterior angles. Again, when we have two lines that are not necessarily parallel, and we take a look at 3 and 5, notice that 3 can be obtuse, 5 can be acute, but in our exploration, when the two lines ended up being parallel, we found that if the two lines are parallel, we found that angle 3 ended up being congruent to angle 5, and these are alternate interior angles. And the same goes for all of these others. Once the lines were parallel, we found that these pairs of angles with these names, alternate exterior, alternate interior, end up being congruent. Now this was the only one that did not end up being congruent. If two lines are parallel, we found in the exploration that angle 2 was supplementary to angle 5. In other words, they added up to 180. So this is the only one where the angles don't end up being congruent but end up being supplementary. Now in summary, here's the 4 theorems that we have that cover what we saw in the exploration. Now you can abbreviate this. You don't have to write out the whole thing. You can say if two lines are parallel, then corresponding angles are congruent. And in this case, 2 and 6 would be congruent, 3 and 7 would be congruent. For this theorem, you can abbreviate. If two lines are parallel, then alternate interior angles are congruent. And this ended up being for 3 and 6 and 4 and 5. If the two lines are parallel, then alternate exterior angles are congruent. And this happened for 1 and 8 and 2 and 7. The last one, if two lines are parallel, then consecutive interior angles are supplementary. So we found that 4 and 6 ended up adding up to 180 and 3 and 5. All right, these are theorems, and theorems can be proved, but let's start off with just working with it right now. So the measures of 3 of these numbered angles are 120. Identify the angles and explain your reasoning. All right, so I know this is the transversal, and I know that this is the interior here. And I know that 120 and 5 are what we call corresponding angles. Since these two arrows indicate we have parallel lines, I'm going to write if two lines are parallel, I can see that corresponding angles have to be congruent. So I know this angle will be 120 degrees. All right, let's go ahead and I'm going to use another color. These two angles are vertical, so this is 120. These two angles are vertical and these are 120. So the question was asking for the measures of the 3 angles that are measuring 120, and that will be angle 4, angle 5, and angle 8. Let's extend this by continuing to find the other angles. These are supplementary, so these are 60, vertical 60. Again, linear pair and supplementary 60, and these are 60. Okay, let's look at the big picture. And the big picture is when you have parallel lines, 4 of the angles will be the same measure and the other 4 will be the same measure. All right, let's take a look at this. We want to find the value of x. All right, I can see that these are vertical angles, so I know that this angle right here will be 115 degrees. And I see these two angles, and I see parallel lines. And I know if two lines are parallel, I know consecutive interior angles are supplementary. So I'll be able to take 115, add it to x plus 5, and I'll get 180. So this will be x plus 120 is equal to 180, and x is equal to 60. And I was being asked to find the measure of x. All right, I can see that this is 136 degrees, and I know that these are supplementary angles, so this will have to be 44 degrees. A linear pair are supplementary. Now I'm taking a look at these two angles, and these are alternate exterior angles, and I'm going to write down the theorem. If two lines are parallel, then alternate exterior angles are congruent. So I'm going to take the 44 and I'm going to set it equal to the 7x plus 9. 7x will be equal to 35 and x will equal 5, and that's what I was trying to find. All right, again we have parallel lines. I can see these arrows here, so I can use these theorems. I'm told that angle 1 is 105 degrees, and I'd like to find 4, 5, and 8. Well, I know that angle 4 is going to be 105, and that's because vertical angles are congruent, and I know that 4 and 5 are congruent, so this is 105. This will be 105, and that's because if two lines are parallel, alternate interior angles are congruent. And once this is 105, I know 8 is 105, and that's because vertical angles are congruent. All right, let's go ahead, and I'm going to clear up everything here so I can do the next problem. All right, it says given angle 3 is 68 degrees and angle 8 is 2x plus 4. It says find the value of x. Let's see, well I know that these are a linear pair, so that this will be 112 degrees. So angles in a linear pair are supplementary. And now angle 4 and angle 8 are corresponding angles. So if two lines are parallel, then corresponding angles are congruent. So I'm going to take 112, set it equal to 2x plus 4. 2x is going to equal 108, and therefore x is equal to 54. Okay, corresponding angles theorem, that was the first one we have. It is a theorem that can be proved, but we have to wait another chapter before we get it proved. So anytime you see two parallel lines, we're going to make the conclusion that corresponding angles are congruent. And again, the proof will be done in the future. Let's take a look at the next one. Let's actually prove this one, and the only theorem that we know is true at this point, we have to wait, is if two lines are parallel, we know corresponding angles are congruent. And we're going to use this theorem to help us prove the others. So we have a pair of parallel lines, and that's the given, so we're going to write given. And then we're going to say angle 1 and angle 3 are congruent. Notice that 1 and 3 are corresponding angles. So I'm going to use the reason if two lines are parallel, corresponding angles are congruent. I know that angle 3 and angle 2 are vertical angles. Vertical angles are congruent. And because there's this connection with congruence here, I can now say 1 is congruent to 2, and that's the transitive property of congruence. So using this, I was able to prove the other theorem. Okay, let's do it again by proving the alternate exterior angles congruent. Again, the one we can use are the ones that we just proved. If two lines are parallel, then corresponding angles are congruent. That one we can use, and since we just proved it, if two lines parallel, alternate interior angles are congruent. We can use either one of those. All right, so first we are given this, and then we're told 1 and 3 are congruent. We're going to use the corresponding theorem. If two lines are parallel, corresponding angles are congruent. And 3 and 2, vertical angles are congruent. I see the connection here, so I know 1 and 3 are congruent, and that's by the transitive property of congruence. And you can see I'm trying to prove that alternate exterior angles are congruent, and I did that in this last step. All right, let's take a look at this picture. We are being told that angle 2 is 40 degrees, so I'm going to put 40 degrees here. And I see some parallel lines. And if you need to, you can make these lines even longer. And we can see that these are interior angles. They're on different sides of the transversal, so they're alternate interior angles. And we know that if two lines are parallel, then alternate interior angles are congruent. So if this angle is 40, then this angle is 40. So we can say the measure of angle 1 is equal to 40. And that is the end of the screencast.